Hey everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to patch 8.15 rundown. For those who don't want to watch a 1 hour long video, I do a TLDR at the end of the video, and there should be a link in the description below. But if you want to watch the whole thing, let's get into it. 8.15 is a patch for League of Legends, duh. It is continuing on the trend of not doing significant changes really anymore. There are things like reworks coming out, as I had mentioned, and for example, Fizz has follow-up changes and whatnot, but for the most part, it's all numbers changes and tune-up. And this is going to be the last regular season patch for NA and EU and probably the other regions as well. LCK just last night started 8/14, so as usual, they're going to be 2 weeks behind, but North America and Europe will have this for week 8 of their LCS splits. Okay, so let's talk about Akali getting reworked, which is pretty cool. Lots of new splash arts, some of them not. I think this is going to be a really exciting champion. I think people are going to really enjoy playing it. Rework looks super cool, and that's pretty awesome. But yeah, we'll see how that goes when she actually comes out. Either way, we have the first change to the patch, which is Fiddlesticks getting nerfed by 20 to 0 mana on Darkwind and losing 5 damage off the ability. Now, Fiddlesticks is a pretty high tier support pick in pro play, and also has a very high win rate in both support and jungle in solo queue. Fiddlesticks' ban rate is rising, he's very annoying to play against, and indeed Darkwind is the very, very annoying part of his kit, where it just bounces a bunch of times and tends to hit champions. It's pretty ridiculous. So, nerf the mana cost, nerf the damage, that seems pretty fair. And in fact, here's the math. On support Fiddlesticks, of course he maxes it first, so at level 9 the nerf goes away as far as mana cost is concerned, but still, a pretty sizable mana cost nerf in the early game. Definitely going to weaken his landing phase. Okay, cool. That is the nerf that matters. What about Jungle Fiddlesticks? Well, Jungle Fiddle maxes E last. So he actually takes the brunt of this change because he has to constantly spend 20 more mana on E, whereas Support Fiddle stops after a while. Losing 5 damage doesn't really change anything. And certainly Support Fiddle versus Jungle Fiddle. Jungle's going to have more ability power, so 5 damage actually means less overall. But it does feel kind of bad that Jungle Fiddle, which is not seemingly the oppressive type of the champion, is getting kind of shafted here by a heavily increased mana cost. And so that's kind of true for the first part. What I want to say, though, is that Jungle Fiddle also can soften that blow pretty easily. On the one hand, when you have blue buff, your mana is functionally infinite, and so you won't feel it once you have blue, and that's going to be your first camp most of the time anyway. But the other big thing is Hunter's Talisman. The way it gives mana regen, unless I'm sorely mistaken, is it gives you a percent of your missing mana back, as opposed to percent mana regen. So increased costs do not hurt Fiddlesticks in the jungle as much, because if it costs him 20 more mana, he's now regenning some of that 20 mana that he's missing. And so it makes it less bad than it would have been. Still, I think a bigger nerf to Jungle Fiddlesticks than Support Fiddlesticks, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong here, because certainly spamming E is the entire reason Support Fiddle works, whereas it's not the entire reason Jungle Fiddle works. So I could be missing the mark here, but either way, that's what it is. I don't think this will remove Support Fiddle from the game, but it will lower his pick rate. All right, next up is follow-up changes to Fizz W. In the previous patch, they removed the sort of cooked mark triple damage mechanic from the previous patch, basically, and gave it a more upfront damage, but then gave him on hit damage for 5 seconds afterwards, which is, 3 to 5 auto attacks based on how much attack speed he has. That missed the mark. He actually lost a really, really lot of his power. He went from like a 51 to a 48% win rate champion in changes that were supposed to be power neutral, and I thought even were going to be buffs, and I was wrong about that. So they buffed the crap out of W's damage yet again, including the AP ratio several times, and said, okay, now for real though, this should line up. They also buffed the ultimate by 0.3, 0.2, and 0.1 ability power, just in case he cared about that. Which now means, by the way, that a high ability power Fizz is going to be able to point blank the ultimate and still get most of the damage, because the AP ratio is not nearly as bad in comparison anymore, as opposed to the base damage being more so. All right. Also, I want to point out that as the base damage is buffed, the ability power ratio is buffed alongside, the goal being to not make tank Fizz come back, because the more you make active base damages go up without buffing AP ratios, the more you incentivize a tank build. So that's kind of the goal here, it seems. Okay, so let's talk about what this has done to Fizz W. All right, so here is the old empowered, or the old basic hit W and attack someone in the previous patch compared to now. And this is by the way right here is 814 to 815, just the simple nerfs right here, right? 10 more damage, up to 50 more damage, and again, here's the numbers. A pretty solid damage bump. Now keep in mind, of course, the ability power ratio was also bumped by 50% as well. So it actually trends upward. It trends further upward over time the more AP you have. This is a substantial, gigantic, huge, massive buff to Fizz W. Okay, but what about the empowered damage, which we did lose back at 814 and needs to be brought back? Well, here's this. Empowered old, which is the old cooked W to the new W, and it is only 10 to 50 damage down. You only lose 10 to 50 damage compared to the 8.13 Fizz, where he was at 51 or so % win rate and got nerfed. Said, okay, well, we removed the cooking mechanic, but now the flat out W is only 10 to 50 damage down, which is pretty close. And because the on-hit damage is quite high and it's 10 to 50 damage as well, it only takes one auto attack with the empowered damage on it to equal the old burst damage. This means in most cases you should be now reaching that damage mark. You've essentially now reached cooked W damage in almost all cases. So the question you have to ask now was, were cooked Ws harder to get, or a second auto attack after W harder to get? And in the case where both were harder, and you couldn't do either, you still get this damage bump. And then on top of that, of course, you get your AP ratio bump to R. So I am very confident, although I was pretty confident last time and was totally wrong, I am very confident now that this Fizz is stronger than the 813 Fizz. I'm quite confident in that. I think Fizz is going to be nuts. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I think. Next up, big changes to Aurelia. Okay, so Aurelia, of course, got hit really, really hard in the previous patch. Well, we should say a couple patches ago. The Rift Rivals patch, she got nerfed really heavily, which I think was 813. So it's been a while since that, and yeah, Aurelia kind of fell off from Pro. She's been a pretty weak champion in solo queue overall, low win rates. So it's time for Aurelia tune-up and Aurelia follow-up. Now, I think Aurelia still counts as a new champion, by the way, and so coming out, Riot had their best guess on what her play pattern would be, how well her itemization would line up, and her keystones would line up, and waited and saw what people did with the champion. End of the day, the last changes were over nerfs, so she's going up. And she's going up as an auto attacker and going down as an assassin. That's the kind of goal here. She is going to less one-shot you and more team fight over time. So let's talk about this. Her attack damage goes up by 3. Her health goes up by 30. These are both hallmarks of sticking in a fight for longer, by the way, especially in the early game. They're trying to buff her early game to make her more usable in that state. They are buffing substantially the Ionian Fervor damage by 3 to 5 based on champion level. However, they are nerfing the range on Blade Surge, the base damage on Blade Surge, and the attack damage ratio on Blade Surge. They are then flattening the damage reduction on Defiant Dance, making it more of a one-point wonder, lowering the range on Flawless Duet, lowering the damage on Flawless Duet, lowering the damage reduction to monsters on Flawless Duet, and increasing the range on Vanguard's Edge. Okay, so they're nerfing ranges by 50 or 25 in 3 spots, but upping her auto attack DPS and lowering her burst in a lot of cases. Okay, let's do some math because this is going to be hard to line up. All right, well, here is Aurelia's base attack damage and her 4-stack auto attack damage before and after the changes. Of course, with 3 more base AD, it's a solid 5 to 2% DPS increase. That's pretty easy to look at. And then with 4 stacks on, it's 15 to 23 more damage, which is really quite substantial. Now, the attack damage ratio of she buys attack damage, the attack damage ratio of her passive have not gone anywhere. So like at 6 items, this is still only 3 AD or 23 more damage on hit. But the fact that she's going for to almost 200 damage on hit without any items at all, still pretty good. And keep in mind that her passive does have a pretty solid AD ratio on it. So, okay. That's new Aurelia. Really substantial. I would say this counts as very substantial. Auto attack damage increase over the course of any given fight. Now let's compare to Blade Surge, because Blade Surge lost 5 damage and 0.1 total attack damage ratio. Well, if all you do is Blade Surge someone out of nowhere, it's going to deal less damage. Now, of course, in the real world, you're going to have a Trinity Force and maybe a Titanic Hydra, and so it's going to be flattened a little bit in the real world, but certainly the base damage of the ability has gone down in all cases. Unless you have gotten your 4 stacks of her passive on, in which case it is a damage bump, and not by much. It's 3 to 4 damage. The damage bump basically keeps up with Blade Surge, but considering it went down 9 to 16, it went up 3 to 4. You need about 3 stacks to keep up, but at 3 or 4 stacks, your DPS is similar or better. Okay, so if you can get to 4 stacks, more damage. If you can get to 4 stacks, more damage. Okay, but that's the requirement, and that's hard to get to, but that's what it would be. Next up is the changes to W and E, which again, Defiant Dance damage reduction is flattened, and Flawless Duet now has a little bit less base damage as the easy to math parts. Well, here you go. And what I assume, by the way, is here is the old Aurelia's ability order, just tapping W and releasing, and casting E and landing. Your W and E together would do this much damage, between 120 and 374, with, of course, an attack damage ratio on the W that, would get added on over time. Now, what I chose here is said, well, if the damage reduction is getting flattened, I probably don't need to rank up W anymore. We're only one-tapping it anyway, and the damage only goes up by like 25 damage, right? I'm usually not full channeling. I'm usually tapping to getting a stack of my passive, so I can 1.1 this, not care about it anymore, and instead rank up my E. I can rank up E instead. So this is the old abilities values and the old ability order. This is the new ability values and the new ability order by maxing E second, because I think you will now. The cooldown does in fact go down on this ability, which means it's pretty worth putting points into. Also keep in mind, E sets up Q reset, so getting it up a second time in a fight is a pretty big deal. Seems useful. So here's the new damage output, and once you get to rank or level 8, which means you've put a second point into your E, you've now got more damage. So once you get into mid-game, and then at every level up until level 18, when you finally put your last point into W to catch up, you are doing more damage than before. Aurelia's mid to late game team fighting is generally stronger. So even though your first Q lost, let's say at level 11, 13 damage, if you landed W and E, you gained 40 because you're ranking up more aggressive damage. That seems pretty useful, right? So even in the case of her Q damage going down, the new level incentive should make her damage go up. Okay. And in the early game, yes, it's down a little bit because you only got rank 1 of both abilities. This is 10 damage off because your other stuff does less damage. Oh, by the way, I'm rolling in her new base attack damage into her W damage right here. So rank 1 W simply does more damage because she has 3 more attack damage, right? This is why this is not a full 10 damage nerf, because it's more like a 7 damage nerf. Okay. But wait, there's more. Of course, the damage reduction, it now has different scaling. And this will be the same regardless of whether or not you choose to max W second versus last. And again, I think you should max it last. Is her damage reduction is, of course, flattened to 50%, which means after level 10, old Aurelia got more damage reduction. But it means her early laning phase and her quick little mid-game at 8 and 9 is the same. So she does lose some team fight damage reduction. And I'm not sure she needed to lose that necessarily, but that's just the way it is right now. Now, typically, Aurelia didn't buy any ability power, but buying ability power would have given you more damage reduction, which would have changed the math on this right here. But basically, this durability percent thing is actually how much more damage you are able to take as a result, right? Taking 0.5 instead of 0.55 damage, you can take 10% more damage before you die. And at the end game, 0.5 to 0.35, you can take 30% less damage before you die. So that math right there, she's going to be less tanky in team fights, but overall is going to be doing more damage. She is more damaging, especially in terms of a DPS scenario of several auto attacks, 23 damage per auto. In Massive Burst, it could be up to as much as 70, which is pretty insane when you start getting a lot of points into E. And that's the kit. That's how that works now. Your E is more important. Landed ability is more important. Your damage reduction is down in the late game. Overall, considering the range reductions as well, I'm not convinced it's actually an Aurelia buff. I do think if the range reductions didn't exist, this would count as a buff. I don't think the damage reduction changes are that big of a nerf, if even at all. I think it's debatable. I think her damage is definitively higher. I think it is essentially unquestionably higher. It requires you stacking up your passive. Sure, okay, that's kind of fair, but I truly think that her damage is now higher. Her durability baseline is indeed higher as well. And she has a higher number of stuns because of her ability order. I don't think the range nerfs are going to hurt her that badly. I think she probably ends up stronger, but it's hard to say. Either way, this is a bit of a reshaping on the champion, a bit less of a ranged assassin. Her engage ranges are down, but definitely does more damage once she's there. Next up, Kindred. Kindred is slightly strong, definitely a high win rate solo queue champion. She is, or they are, the number 4 overall jungler in Pro in 8.14. So a nerf to the W, and a nerf to the cooldown on R. This is just simply half the gains. This is 20 seconds more on the cooldown. I didn't do any math for this because the math isn't exactly that intricate. It's just a bit weaker. And it's an esoteric enough change as far as this that I don't really know exactly how to math out how valuable this truly is. So it's something, it matters. Wolf's going to do less damage. And to be fair, I think nerfing Wolf is the best place to nerf Kindred, because I think Wolf is the most invisible of damage sources. Like every auto attack I get and my Q coming out and throwing out arrows and all that stuff, like that's appreciable and I can understand and I feel. But I think it's very difficult to notice a Wolf hitting people. And so Wolf hitting more slowly, I think, is less of a big deal in general. Not that Wolf isn't valuable. I'm saying it's less appreciable. Either way. Let's move on to Lee Sin changes. Now, Lee Sin is a very interesting champion. He is ever so slightly weak right now, but he's a very popular champion. People want to play Lee Sin, and I personally, not as a game designer or someone who makes decisions at Riot, I think it is actually correct for Riot to spend more attention making sure that Lee Sin is viable, or Yasuo is viable, or Ahri is viable, than it is to make sure Urgot is viable. Now, it's not to say that they should leave Urgot in a bad space, but if you have the bandwidth to buff one champion to viability, I think you'd choose Lee Sin 100% of the time. And it's because more people like playing Lee Sin. It's the trolley problem. I can save one person or 20 people by redirecting the train. I choose to save Lee Sin every time. I think that's pragmatic. I think that's fair because you're being fair to your player base. It's not even about having a favorite champion. It's about helping as many players as possible. That's pragmatism. So in my opinion, making sure Lee Sin is viable and Yasuo are viable, I think is pragmatically good game design. Personally, how I feel about it. You can feel free to disagree. That's how I feel. I'm happy to see Lee Sin buffs. I also like playing Lee Sin. I'm a Mastery 7 Lee Sin. I like the champion. He's very fun to play. So the first thing we see is a nerf to his abilities. He does 5 less damage on either half of Q, but of course the AD ratio goes up by 0.1. Well, oh, wait, there was an Olaf buff wait, I didn't include Lee Sin. Where's my Lee Sin thing? Oh, I forgot to include Lee Sin. I didn't clip that. But I remember the numbers, basically. So this is simply, if you have 50 bonus attack damage, Q does more damage. If you have 50 more... sorry, I'm blanking my brain because I'm like racking my brain on what happened. If you have 50 more total attack damage, if you have 50 more bonus attack damage, Q does more damage, which is a nerf to the early game and a buff to the late game, essentially. Okay. Now, here's the big change. The execute damage no longer is 8% of the target's missing health as bonus damage, but deals up to double damage based on the target's missing health. This is, of course, a math problem. How much health does my opponent have? How much damage does my Q deal? One of these is a bigger deal. So I did the math, and though I don't have a chart for you right now, there will be a chart in the Imgur album in the link below the video if you want to look at it yourself. But I remember the numbers pretty well. I used Lee Sin as the sample target. Lee Sin scales from about 585 to 2,085 roughly health. He goes from high 500s to just under 2,100, which is a pretty reasonable health bar for most champions. Now, someone like Braum is going to have more. Mega Gnar is going to have more. Ashe is going to have less. Quinn's going to have about the same amount because Quinn is often a solo laner in the top lane. But that's roughly the balance right there. In the case of Lee Sin is hitting another Lee Sin at equal level, Q deals more damage almost all the time. Without buying any attack damage at all, this change is a strict buff to Lee Sin Q if he's in a mirror matchup. And Lee Sin has pretty average health, and being a jungler has pretty average levels. Someone like Janna is going to take way more damage, and someone like Ashe is going to take way more damage. Someone like Braum is going to typically take less. Someone like Sejuani or Cho'Gath is going to take less. I'm kind of restating the point, but that's what it comes down to. Additionally, keep in mind that this also was only counting a base attack damage Lee Sin. He has a now much more aggressive bonus attack damage ratio on the ability, which means this ability could in total have up to a 3.0 bonus attack damage ratio instead of a 1.8 bonus AD ratio plus 8% missing health. All in all, this appears to be, in general, a buff to Lee Sin. One other thing I want to point out is he still has anti-tank scaling on the kit. When he kicks someone, they deal damage to everyone else based on their bonus HP. So if Lee Sin kicks Cho'Gath through Ashe and then lands QQ onto Ashe, Ashe is taking way more damage than she ever has before. And that's kind of the dream of Lee Sin, it feels like, is doing that kind of stuff. So that's the overall math on Sonic Wave Resonating Strike. He will do more damage in the mirror matchup, and the question is, how frequently is that different? Now, I also ran numbers on what about his monster killing, but I ran numbers on it being a 50% increased damage based on missing health, which is what the change was before it became 100% during like PvE patch notes, and it was not kind to him. Right, again, it is slightly a buff in mirror matchups and better as his attack damage goes up. Monsters generally have way more health than him. Things like small Krugs, okay, you'll probably get benefited, but going for things like Red Buff and Dragon, the damage is down. He has less execute damage against things like Dragon and Baron and Rift Herald. And this is counting the fact that the Q damage was capped. It was capped at something like 5,000 max HP. Which means you're getting that 400 bonus damage like all the time. Okay, enough time on Lee Sin. Let's move on. Next up, buffs to Morgana. Nerfs to Morgana. A solid 4 off the mana regen per 5, and a solid 30 extra mana on Black Shield. For some reason, Olaf is before Morgana, even though L, M, N, O, P somehow Imgur alphabetized it this way. Whatever, we're going to go to Morgana. And I like to use, as you saw probably in the previous rundown, I like to do mana per minute as my mana regen stat because it's in numbers that are appreciable to a player. So Morgana goes from regenerating 3 mana per second, or 180 mana per minute, down by a solid 27%, which is a very substantial mana regen nerf. Now keep in mind, every support Morgana is buying Spell Thieves, thus bumping the mana regen a fair bit, but at the end of the day, still down this solid 18% mana regen. This is really, really meaningful. Now, I want to point out, by the way, that going down to 11 mana per 5 still puts her in a class of about 6 champions with 11 mana per 5 or more, and it's basically all hard supports. Are all in this boat right here. It's now, by the way, Zyra alone at 15 at the very top. There's a collective at 11. In my opinion, I feel like support's mana regen should be handled by Spell Thieves existing, and their actual base mana regen just sort of being a more normal value, but that's just me. Doesn't really matter too much. Either way, a very substantial nerf to her mana regen, of course. And because mana regen items multiply by base MP5, the ratio stays the same. The 30 more mana on E is pretty obvious. It's 30 more mana on E. Congratulations. Same value all the time. For fun, I decided to say, hey, how many E's per minute can she cast? Because why not? If all you're doing is playing reactive Morgana, you could cast 4 to 5 Black Shields per minute and never run out of mana. Now you can cast 2 to 3. Okay. Good to know. Kind of matter. Wanted to bring it up. Next up, small buffs to Olaf. Oh, and I want to point out real quick, Morgana is actually a statistically stronger mid laner than support. I think Morg mid is actually quite good, especially considering we're in a world where we have like hard carry junglers like Kindred and Graves and Nocturne, and we have plenty of viable hard carry bottom laners. Like, we know Quinn is good, we know Xayah's good, we know Twitch and Jinx are good, we know Kais is generally good. Like, Morgana support. Oh, and there's like a bunch of top lane carries right now, right? We're not seeing a ton of tanks in a lot of places. You don't need to get hard damage out of your mid laner. I think going for picks and protecting a backliner is fine. I think Morgana mid should be played. And I also think, interestingly enough, a nerf to mana regen is, I think, a slightly lower nerf to Morgana, because she's going to buy things like Tier or buy things like Lost Chapter even, which give mana regen in ways that aren't simple MP5. Also, every blue buff you get is mana regen in things that aren't just MP5. So I feel like Morgana is not as heavily touched in the mid lane role as she is in support, but maybe I'm totally wrong in that the high cost of Tormented Soil is going to make this a very big nerf for mid lane Morgana. Either way, mid Morg is good. Support Morg is definitely a top tier ban and a top tier pick in pro play. So next up is Olaf, getting 50% more attack speed on his W. W is typically maxed last, I do believe. Oh, everything's out of order. Okay, let's go back to Lee Sin real quick. Here is the damage table on the old Q. Again, it's a 9 to 3% less damage, and 50 damage off, by 50 AD, and it's buffed. And then here's the damage table. And this is actually better than I thought it was. So this is how much bonus damage are you getting against an essentially 1 health target, where Lee Sin was the target, and going from 570 to 2015 as the health bar, right? So the bonus damage you could have got, the max bonus damage you could have gotten with 8% missing health was between 46 and 161 based on that. And of course, the new bonus damage you can get is 50 to 170 based in rank, because duh. I forgot this. At level 9, the damage bump is so severe that your target would have about 2,000 health. In fact, more than 2,000 health, because 8% of 2,000 is only 160. At level 9, no one has 2,000 health. Lee Sin is power spiking like an MFer. Is power spiking hard with this Q change. This is a really, 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 really big deal. This is a substantial damage buff. Technically at level 2, when your Q is still rank 1 and people have 630 health, yes, it's kind of a nerf, but like, this is a really substantial damage bump. Now, of course, this goes down as people buy health, but it goes up as you buy attack damage. I forgot how severe these numbers were. This is a massive buff to Lee Sin. This should, I think, again, still probably slightly nerf his jungle clear, but it'll also require different thought process on his jungle clear. Because now your ideal Q target is, in fact, the small wolf, getting it to about half and landing Q2 to kill it. Whereas before, you always wanted to put it generally on the big wolf after landing a bunch of autos and then lowering it down. So this can have buffs to his clear as well, but again, for things like Gromp, things like Big Blue, things like Big Red, it's simply not. And again, his securing on things like Red and Blue, or on like Elder Dragon and whatnot, not going to be quite as good. Okay, Olaf. Let's go back up to Olaf. 50% more attack damage on his W is this. I believe the ability was maxed last, unless I'm crazy, but 15% more attack speed with your W on is a 11 to 7% attack speed bump. That's meaningful. Olaf is actually a generally pretty solid top laner right now, and then a slightly weak jungler. So basically they're just buffing his early game, hoping that early game Olaf can continue to be the thing. I think top Olaf is going to be great as of this. I think Olaf is a very, very good duelist. With the nerfs to teleport, by the way, more and more champions are realizing that Ignite and Ghost and things like this are better summoners in the top lane. That you're going to be more and more able to just all in your lane opponent, push them out of lane, push them under turret, take your recall, walk back to lane with boots of speed thanks to First Blood, and not be terribly far behind. And more, like, the more champions they look at for their win rate data, Garen, his best summoner, is in fact Ignite, to finish the all-in, kill off his opponent. Darius, his best rune, or best summoner spell by a lot, is Ghost, to make the all-in happen, knock his opponent down, force the recall. kill the opponent, etc., etc. More and more champions, and more players, in fact, the play rate is rising as well on these summoner spells. By the end of the year, I'm going to predict that in solo queue, by the end of the year, before mid-season, TP will stop being the meta top lane summoner spell. In solo queue. I think in pro play, people will not change this until literally every challenger player they ever play against is running Ignite Fior and they go, I can't fucking play Poppy anymore. And then it will change in pro. But pros will be the last to change. But I predict in solo queue, we'll see combat summoners top again on most champions. And Olaf having nuts dueling at level 2 with vicious strikes and exhaust and Q chain. That's going to be part of the reason this change is around. Let's move on to our next set of changes. Quinn is losing 4 armor and 5 damage off of Harrier. So 4 armor, as again, stuff continues to be out of order. Let me see if I can find Quinn down here, because I'm sure I did it. Here's Quinn. I didn't realize it got so out of order. I would have uploaded this differently and rearranged stuff. But here is her physical durability as a result of losing 4 armor. Now you can see 88 is still a very, very high armor mark, by the way. This is actually insanely high. I don't think Quinn needs to be this stupidly durable as a champion, is what it is. But losing 3 to 2% of her physical durability. Now Harrier, this looks like a fairly decent nerf. Ooh, losing 5 damage. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. But Harrier, of course, requires you to auto attack in the first place, and has its own total attack damage ratio. So losing 5 damage doesn't mean that much, right? Going from 15 to 10, yeah, you think that matters, but it's actually going from 83 to 78, and this is not counting any bonus attack damage at all. And of course, she's probably going to go Doran's Blade and buy something like a Storm Razor or something else. So losing 5 damage off Harrier really doesn't mean much. But it is, in fact, an early game damage nerf. So, all right, she's mostly taking early game nerfs. This will not keep Quinn from being obnoxiously strong. Quinn has finally been realized as a strong bot laner. It took a long time. Her win rate has been very high in bot lane for literally years. For years, Quinn has been a high win rate bot laner. Well before all the Marksman stat changes, well before the Marksman crit changes, well before all of that, Quinn had been a very high win rate top laner and a very high win rate bot laner. Finally, people are discovering it. People are figuring it out. All it took was people to think conventional marksmen are not viable, and they finally realized that the other marksmen were already good and started playing them as well. This is a long time coming, but there you go. Nerfs to Quinn. She will still be on the strong side, should still be pro viable, should still be able to do a lot of stuff. Next up is Syndra, gaining 20 to 0 damage off of her Q, or onto her Q, I should say. Syndra definitely in a slightly weak state, about a 47% win rate solo Q champion. Here is this math right here. 40 to eventually not the same damage, or not a change, I should say. Yeah, meaningful buff to Syndra, absolutely. Cool. This is going to gain her several win rate in solo queue. And she's already been seen in pro, but she'll be seen more in pro. So that's a thing. Next up, buffs to Thresh. So the cooldown incentive on Dark Passage has gone up by an extra 1 second per rank, capping down at 12 seconds instead of 16, and the start being 22. That's a very substantial buff to the number of lanterns you get. Now, I don't think you will necessarily see the ability order change, but you might. And so I'm going to entertain that in my math. That maybe you actually max W second for the super sick spams of Lantern. Maybe. I don't know if it's true, but maybe you would. Also, a pretty substantial bump to the E damage. Instead of being 80 to 200, it's 100 to 200. Now keep in mind, the base damage of the souls every auto attack is going to be in there. And that's going to be increasing the damage contributions on both halves, but the maximum attack damage contribution, meaning if you waited and then auto-attacked someone a while later, that damage cooks up over time. And it's up by 20% at rank 1. So I decided, hey, what if, as we look for Thresh down here, there's Thresh, what if we changed our ability order? What if we maxed W second instead of E second? Just for funsies. Well, of course, you get a very, very substantial cooldown bump on your Lantern. In fact, at level 13, where it's completely the opposite of before, it's almost half the cooldown of before, and hey, maybe that matters for you. This is just, if this matters enough to you as a Thresh player to have this kind of damage coming in. Because if you wanted to max E last, the sort of pain is softened quite a bit. Of course, your first 7 levels are just simply better because it was a 1-point wonder anyway, so that's already quite nice. And you're getting another 20% of your total attack damage in there, which just is a simple laning phase buff, and Thresh is going to be better now. But even if you chose to not rank the ability anymore, you're still doing about 2/3 of the damage, even at the worst possible scenario. And then, of course, it softens from there. And really, at a certain point, how much does the first auto of Thresh's kit do? Because at most, you're going to lose 55 damage. Because Thresh does not buy attack damage. He does pick up souls, which is going to be a flat damage increase. And he has other abilities on his kit that do things and whatnot. He will lose 55 damage on the first auto attack of a team fight. He will also lose some of the active damage on Flight. I didn't do that math, to be fair, because that's kind of unchanged. But if he wanted to rank Flay last, he would lose that as well. I don't know if he's going to do it, but if he does, it's this. And if he doesn't change any of his ability order, he has much more damage to the first 12 levels of his kit. Well, not much more, some more damage to the first 12 levels of his kit. All right, that's cool. Thresh like a 49% win rate, or like a 40, yeah, he's like a 49% win rate champion. Didn't really need buffs, it felt like, but it happened. Now, here's a change that I'm actually pretty much in support of. So the general read was that supports had too much lane control. And so they no longer get 3 health potions or refillable. They now have to spend 100 gold on raw consumables, 2 health potions, to go into lane. I'm pretty okay with that, actually. I'm actually pretty frustrated with the fact that they had 3 health potions in lane. That seemed like too many. I think 2 is okay because you consider things like Doran's Blade and Doran's Shield have health regen on them. Only Relic Shield has health regen on it. So if you have Coin or Spell Thieves, I think it's okay you get a second potion, whereas a typical Marksman only gets 1. I think it's reasonable. So now it's a more reasonable amount of health regen. But the combined cost, oh, this is actually going to be changed. This is actually different from what it was going to be. The combined cost was, at a certain point, 400. Now it's just 450, so the total gold cost is unchanged here. Okay, so end of the day, you buy 1 less potion coming into lane, and thus, you know, your combined cost technically is going to get there a little bit sooner, but you're going to be in lane a little bit less long. There was a change on PvE where these were actually cheaper items. That didn't happen at the end of the day, which is fine. I don't think it needed to happen. I think it's actually a good change. Supports, I think, did have too much sway over the very, very early laning phase, so I actually like this quite a bit. Okay. Next up, yeah, Marksmen optimization getting more tune-up, because, yeah. So I still think crit Marksmen are completely viable power-wise. Now, if players find them unsatisfying because they come online too late, that is a reasonable thing. That is reasonable to say, I'm not satisfied, my items come on too late. And in fact, that is indeed what is being changed here. IE is 200 gold cheaper, Storm Razor is 400 gold cheaper, Essence Reaver has more attack damage, and the Zeal upgrades are all 100 gold cheaper. So these items are all coming online sooner. Conventional, critting Marksmen, all got cheaper items. Okay, so Infinity Edge is indeed 200 gold cheaper, has 100 less attack damage on it, and indeed has less true damage conversion on it as well. Let's do a math experiment into Infinity Edge before and after the changes, okay? So in 8.10, the old live Infinity Edge, the old Spring Sprint Infinity Edge was this item right here. 70 attack damage. And I want to point out, by the way, a mathematical equivalence. 50% crit damage is the same stat in expected value terms as your crit items have 50% more crit chance on them. It's essentially the same unique passive as current Infinity Edge, which is your crit is worth more crit. Those are the same thing in expected value. And so what I did here is a chart of gold efficiency on Infinity Edge by itself. Indeed, IE by itself is 107% gold efficient for 70 attack damage and what is mathematically equivalent to 30 crit chance. If you bought a Brawler's Glove, and then a Zeal, and then a Rapid Fire Cannon, and then a Rapid Fire Cannon plus Static Shiv, it is worth 50% more of each of those critical strike chances. Thus, this was the gold efficiency of the old Infinity Edge, right? An 80% crit build, i.e. was 143% gold efficient because of this unique passive being so good multiplying your crit chance. 8.13 with the micro patch, the one we are all playing on right now, before this patch comes out. Maybe it's just at 8.14, doesn't really matter though. This was Infinity Edge. It was not efficient by itself, and it was not efficient at Brawler's Gloves, and it was not efficient at Zeal, but it was efficient at Rapid Fire Cannon, and it was efficient at Rapid Fire Cannon plus Static Shiv when it was worth 40% bonus crit chance. Now, of course, 122 is not 143, right? RFC plus Shiv 143, RFC plus Shiv 122. Less gold efficient as an item. But the Infinity Edge we are all playing with right now has a unique passive that the old IE didn't have, which is true damage conversion, right? Because again, the crit damage is essentially the same thing as crit chance. But here's a true damage conversion, which it depends what you're doing, what you're fighting against, how you're playing. But depending on how much crit you have and how much armor your opponent has, it's worth some amount of bonus stats. 15% true damage conversion against 100 armor at 100 crit is 15% more auto attack damage flat out outright. That's what Brawler's Gloves does. Is if you buy your first Brawler's Gloves, it is 10% more damage for 400 gold. And so I chose that as my target sort of thing. Right, it's essentially like getting you an extra Zeal worth of crit, kind of. This gets sort of wobbly. Either way, let's move on to the new Infinity Edge, which is now cheaper. Same, sort of glorious unique passive. Comes online 200 gold cheaper, though it gives you less attack damage. And unless I did my math wrong here, your item efficiency starts creeping up and up and up, and you have your RFC plus Shiv 19% more gold efficient, 1,600 more gold worth of stats right here. Because, of course, you lost 350 gold worth of value, and you got it 200 gold cheaper. So, in a way, Infinity Edge became less efficient, because, in a way, Infinity Edge was already very efficient. But it lost quite a lot of efficiency. The benefit being, though, that it comes online sooner, and that in itself, of course, is a big deal. And in terms of this math, if you're not counting the true damage crits, is a weaker item. Now, I don't want to spend a million hours on this. Even calling 10% true damage on crits 400 gold is disingenuous, because trying to scrape together ways to truly multiply your damage is hard. Right? There's a reason items like Last Whisper are not built until 4th or 5th item, because that kind of multiplication is not valuable till later in the game. Again, don't want to spend too much time. It's hard to truly math out how valuable it truly is, but this basically makes your items come online sooner. But on paper, it doesn't look that good, because 200 gold is not worth 10 attack damage. Okay. I'm going to skip towards the Zeal upgrades. The Zeal upgrades being 100 gold cheaper. There's this right here. Now, they are certainly not as efficient as they were before the patch. 810. Because the stats never changed, right? So it went from 2600, 2900, 2800. Still is 78% gold efficient. All right, multiplying into your Infinity Edge and everything else. But of course, these items still coming down the line quite later. And being 100 gold cheaper is still 200 gold more expensive than pre-patch. Venomancer, kind of same boat. Stormrazor, of course, getting updated as well. Losing 5 attack speed, losing 10 attack damage, but 400 gold cheaper starts to be a reasonable sort of cut to the item. So what is Stormrazor? Here's Stormrazor. Before it was 105, now it's 104% gold efficient. Close enough. And keep in mind, if it has even 100% gold efficiency, you're getting a unique passive for free. The unique passive is bonus crit chance, essentially, and bonus move speed on your first auto attack. So you're still paying 0 gold for this benefit, which is still super, 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 super good. Stormrazor is now more rushable. 2,800 gold is now a reasonably cheap major item. It is now more rushable and just, if not more valuable. So Marksmen are coming online sooner, and by a lot here. I mean, Stormrazor is 400 gold cheaper. Then your Zeal upgrade is another 100 gold cheaper. So now you're at that spike, 500 gold cheaper. And then you get to Infinity Edge, another 200 gold cheaper. So now you're 700 gold in the lead. You're 700 gold ahead pre-patch, which means you can spend that 700 gold on the Brawler's Glove that gives you another 400 gold of efficiency. And in fact, in kind of the real world, is 800 gold because you bought the damn thing. So you're actually farther along in your build. And that's where it all comes together. is you are now, as of this patch, 700 gold farther ahead in your item builds, right? Because the entire point of playing the Crit Marksman was getting there, right? Getting to that 3-item point, getting up to that severely awesome point. Getting there was the hard part. And now you're getting to 3 items and 4 items 700 gold sooner. And in fact, to 4 items, 800 gold sooner because of rapid fire cannon being cheaper. Now, looking at it, sort of coming back at the game, looking at it here and comparing it to 8.11 and the changes there, I think that Riot did go overboard in slowing down Crit Marksman build paths. Like, I think rapid fire cannon and stuff should have only been 150 or 200 gold more expensive. I think Infinity Edge, like all this stuff could have been softened a lot. Like, IE's unique passive, instead of being double crit chance, could have been 1.5x crit chance and been the exact same unique passive as Infinity Edge, essentially, and not had as much of the craziness going on. And like, maybe that didn't need to go as hard as making Crit Marksman your anti-tank characters. But such as it is, this, I am pretty confident, even though IE kind of in itself didn't really get buffed. In fact, Infinity Edge actually got nerfed. Like, the builds got faster and the top end went down. That is literally what happened. The builds got faster and the top end went down. And starting with IE made it weird because IE got nerfed as everything else got buffed. And that's why it was like, wow, IE just sucks more, because it kind of does. So trying to sum up all the changes to AD carry items, it should be that... Oh, actually, I kind of like this BF pickaxe, by the way, because getting pickaxe in a first recall feels good. That's kind of a nice change as well. This is a double longsword, by the way, and only 1 dagger. Like, small itemization, like build path changes. Okay, whatever. But yeah, they basically went back about halfway or 1/3 of the way from the mid-season changes, which is, right, they lowered the costs back down. They lowered the true damage anti-tank conversion down quite a bit. And they had Stormraiser, a really sick rush item. One other thing that happened, and I don't have it at my fingers right now, there is, I don't know if it's a data scientist or a game designer or what, went and did really hard math on build progression, comparing Stormraiser builds to non-Stormraiser builds to sort of the general sort of build paths of where champions are going. And generally speaking, yes, the champions are coming on, like, and doing like the raw DPS math and trying to guess how much Stormraiser crits you're going to get and all this other stuff. But did a bunch of hard math with charts and tables and graphs and everything else. And yeah, AD carries are coming online sooner. They're going to be influential sooner. And you should now be able to feel like you're having some sway over the game before the landing phase is over, because you're getting a Stormraiser or getting to your crit upgrades and whatnot. So hopefully this starts to make Crit Marksman feel better, because I agree that a lot of people felt bad playing them because they weren't coming online in time. The top end is down, but they're coming online sooner. 5 attack damage and Essence Reaver. I ran gold efficiency on that. It's here. Cool. It's even more gold efficient and pretty substantially so. 5 attack damage is worth quite a lot of gold. Yeah, it's a good item. It's gold efficient. Yeah, I know you don't always really, really want mana, but even if you cut the mana off, it's still almost gold efficient and still has the refund mechanic. So Essence Reaver should still feel like a good sort of stopover item. And again, could be a good like first item and then you transition into crit or something. I don't know. But I think Essence Reaver is actually quite good. And then finally, more top end going down. Mercurial Scimitar going down 200 gold. But losing more than 200 gold worth of attack damage. Scimitar will be less gold efficient. Here it is. Goes from 89 to 79% gold efficient. And this is a luxury item anyway. And of course, you're getting an active item cleanse. You're spending about 400 gold on it here. You're spending more like 750 on it here. And to be fair, I think it's totally reasonable to remove suppression, for 750 gold. I think it's totally fine. So again, all the changes together, they lower the top end of Crit Marksman, which is funny because the changes in the in 8.11 were actually raising their top end and lowering their floor. This kind of does this a bit. And I think that was probably the right call at the end of the day. Like, I think one of the unfortunate circumstances of the midseason changes was that they nerfed the base stat. Like, they basically nerfed regen and floored the items of a lot of Crit Marksmen. And I think if those were done separately, Like if they did the mage changes and said, yes, and also we are going to lower health regen to make mages work in bot lane, and like everything else is the same, I think you'd have had a much friendlier look at the patch overall. I think that would have helped a lot. And then in isolation, done the AD items and then said, ooh, overtuned it, and then, changed it. Oh, well. Next up, Monster Hunter change. They removed the they changed the requirement from most individual gold on your team to most CS on your team. And typically it is hard for a jungler to have the most CS on the team without poaching a bunch of lane minions. This should still have it affect funneling, but it should be less likely to affect Shaco and Shyvana and whatever when they go to hold a lane. I want to point out, by the way, that I actually looked at win rate stats. I spot checked Shaco and Graves in 8.14 compared to 8.13. They did not actually lose win rate. Now, I'm not to say it doesn't feel bad to sometimes get 4 gold in a caster minion. Don't get me wrong. I trust that it feels bad. But the actual power levels did not actually go anywhere. I want to be very clear on that you lost 50 gold 1 out of every 3 games. Not a big nerf. I understand it feels bad and that sticks with you. Trust me, I understand that. Don't get me wrong. That's a relevant criticism, but like it did not actually nerf your champion. But this is a better if statement, of course. What's funny is I remember asking if anyone had a better if statement than this, and it was like, yeah, just only let one person have smite. And like it's like, okay, well, like that has crazy massive ramifications. I actually remember, and I want to give him a shout out actually. Dardoch tweeted about like how lame this was on like the first day of the patch, and I was like, I agree it's lame. Do you have any better ideas? And he, about half an hour later, he came back and tweeted, it's like, I thought about it. No, I don't. And just like the fact that he had the honesty to say, no, I actually don't have a better answer than this. And just having like a really quick conversation with him on Twitter, just like, I agree it sucks, but do you have a better option? And he's like, this might be the best option. Was like, cool. Like showed some maturity. He actually tried. He came back and said, no, you're right. I want to give him a shout out because I think that's actually mature of him, and that's cool. I think it's totally valid to like have criticism over how lame this feels, because I agree. I still think it's the lesser of the two evils. And I think this is now actually a better version. And props to the game designer who came up with this to say, actually, you know what? I'll bet you highest CS is a more stringent if statement, and will affect junglers less. So this should feel pretty happy for most junglers. And people asked, and yes, Treeline's going to lose funneling as well, which is cool. Stopwatch nerfed by 2 minutes. Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of what happened, right? Like, okay, let's see if, in 8.10, like maybe we can bring stopwatch back. And yeah, 10 minutes just seems accurate for perfect timing. So, okay. Less stopwatches in pro. That seems like a good thing. I have found stopwatches to be fairly enjoyable. Like, we finally got to the point where people realized how good stopwatch is. And we're seeing, like, people who, even if they aren't trying to buy Guardian Angel, though many are buying stopwatch and using it in team fights, and it like actually feels like it has gameplay around it. I've found stopwatch seems to be a pretty enjoyable item in the game, especially if you have to buy it. And the more you nerf the rune, the more you say, no, buy this thing instead. This feels kind of nice. I think it's a good nerf, but I'm actually kind of glad that stopwatch actually exists in the game. Chroma's in the collection tab. That's going to be cool. Improvements to the store and gifting. That's kind of nice. There's going to be a stats tab in the profile. This is going to be super cool. I'm looking forward to this. I'm really looking forward to using stats to sort of look at my gameplay, see what I'm bad at, see what I'm good at. I really enjoy improving. I think it's very important to improve as a player. This is pretty cool. I like it. A couple of bug fixes. Minor buff to this. I didn't know. Yeah, so there's a couple of like auto attack reset like bugs kind of things. Halo blades. Okay, so these are cool little buffs here. That's nice. Pool parties coming out. That's pretty sweet. Some more chromas coming out for Akali, Caitlyn, Rek'Sai, Gangplank, Taric, and Zoe. Lots more pool party stuff. Cool. Fun things. TLDR. Let's do it. Welcome to the TLDR 8.15 rundown. Akali is getting reworked. Looks really cool. looks really cool. Fiddlesticks is going to lose some of his support obnoxiousness power, but Jungle Fiddle is going to lose some mana as well. I think both will be fine even with the changes. I think new Fizz W is going to be nuts overpowered. It basically makes up... This is essentially, if you land your W plus 1 auto attack, is the same as the old cooked W, but in all cases. So I'm pretty sure Fizz is strictly stronger than his 8.13 form. Aurelia gaining a lot of auto attack DPS to the tune of almost 15% in some cases, losing some burst damage unless you have 4-stacked Ionian Fervor. There's a decent chance you want to 1.1 her W and instead max E, which means her mid-game damage is substantially increased. E has a way higher damage scaling per rank than W does, thus making you really want to consider making E your max second. Ranges go down a little bit, which can hurt, but overall, Aurelia should have more overall damage, if not a little bit less range, but probably is stronger as a result. Kindred, yep, pretty easy nerf to see on paper. Lee Sin Q, it only takes 50 attack damage to make this a buff, which means the nerf to the early game, but a buff once you have Warrior. And this is a ridiculously huge buff in most champion combat cases, and especially spikes at level 9, because you are dealing up to double this damage as opposed to 8% of 1,000 of someone's health. It's not even close. This is a stupidly high damage buff to Lee Sin overall. I expect a substantial win rate jump for Lee Sin as a result. Morgana losing a fair bit of mana regen and some black shield is going to nerf her support, is going to nerf her mid. Olaf gaining quite a bit of attack speed and is already a pretty good top laner. I expect Olaf top to be a very, very good top laner. People are already willing to play fighting top laners now. I think you could see Olaf versus Fiora, Olaf versus Aatrox, Olaf versus maybe even running down a Poppy or something. I want to see lane bully Olaf. I think it's good. There's also might be enough to bring back Jungle Olaf, but right now Trundle's popular, so probably not unless you start banning Trundle, but Trundle's not getting banned all that much. He's banning some, but not a ton. Quinn, definitely a really abusive top laner and bot laner, losing some early power to be bullied, but I think will still be a bully, will still be very strong. We will still see Quinn as a viable and strong option. Syndra, definitely on the weak side, gaining some damage on Q is nice. We'll probably keep seeing her in pro play, and gets closer to about, let's say, 48-49% win rate in solo queue. Thresh has a reason to max W second, though he probably won't. Either way, going to do more damage in the early game and have more cooldowns if you ever get to level 17 and beyond. Well, okay, 14 and beyond, but you know what I mean. Supports will have less agency in the bottom lane because they will have one less health potion. That is a pretty big deal. That's going to matter a lot for the laning phases. You can now poke stuff out of lane. This is probably the biggest change to champions like Zyra who want to actually poke you. Also affects farming bot laners like Zyra or Brand or whatever. Poke is going to be more, one less potion, a pretty big deal, and now you have the chance of actually going for the support and having it stick. Before you really couldn't very much. Big changes to Infinity Edge, Storm Razor, the Zeal item upgrades, Essence Reaver, and Mercurial Scimitar. Essentially, crit marksmen who go Storm Razor, Rapid Fire, IE, are getting their builds to that point 700 gold sooner. That is a very, very substantial bump in power. As a result, the items are mostly less efficient, and they get, of course, to their second Zeal, another 100 gold sooner. So the whole, let's delay crit marksman is being walked back. I think it should have been walked back. I'm glad it is now being walked back. The top end is going down. The builds are coming online sooner. I think it'll actually end up being a buff to the class. There's a decent chance that Jinx and Twitch become the best champions in the game as a result of these changes. And it also means that Riot's probably going to have to walk back some of those health changes that they did a while ago and other stuff, but we'll get to that when it comes to it. Essence Reaver becoming more gold efficient, getting more damage on it. That's kind of nice. Mercurial Scimitar becoming less efficient. I actually do like that this item is going down in value, because seeing people choose to build things like Blade of the Ruin King is how they will keep their 6-item insane damage threshold up there. Scimitar is obviously not the high damage item, and it definitely will be even less so now. Cool. A better statement for turning on Monster Hunter is now highest CS instead of highest gold. That should be more stringent here. Perfect time nerf by 2 minutes. That's kind of nice. And some skins coming out. That's going to do it for 8.15. Hope you enjoy, and I will see you next time.